Dear, yes. Dear colleagues and others, no, just joke. Dear colleagues, before I present the third keynote at this Congress, I want to alert you that immediately after the keynote, we will make some short announcements from this stage, and we have even been promised a 1-minute film. So that's worth it. So, it is my distinct honor to welcome you to this evening's keynote speech. Today we have the privilege of hearing from a scholar whose extensive work has significantly advanced our understanding of natural resources, energy, and economic development over time, with a particular focus on Spain, Europe, and Latin America. Professor Mar Rubio-Varas is a renowned researcher, educator, and leader in our field. She has a solid international career with a PhD from London School of Economics, a year as a Fulbright research scholar at the University of California, Berkeley, then at the Universitat Pompeu Fabra in Barcelona, until she moved to her present University of Navarra. Her impressive career includes leading numerous research projects and publications on energy history and economic growth, exploring the transition to low-carbon economies and the water-energy nexus. One of her notable projects includes an Horizon 2020 Euratom research project funded with over 3 million euros. Her work not only bridges historical analysis with economic theory and quantitative methods, but also informs contemporary policy debates. Over the past decade, Professor Rubio has dedicated herself to the complex history of nuclear energy, examining its development, societal impacts on water resources, and economic and energy system implications. Her research is widely recognized for its depth and interdisciplinary approach, providing crucial insights into one of the most pivotal energy sources in modern history. Beyond her academic achievements, Professor Rubio is deeply committed to outreach and public engagement, actively participating in initiatives to promote historical understanding among broader audience. Her dedication to advancing knowledge, combined with her leadership in various academic and research initiatives, make her a truly inspiring figure in our field. It is now my great pleasure to invite Professor Mar Rubio to share her insights. Please join me in giving her a warm welcome.
Dear friends, dear colleagues, let me first start by thanking the organization of the World Economic History Society to get me here tonight talking to you. I would also like to thank all my friends from the Public University of Navarra sitting here at the front that support me not only today but through the years, and the many friends from the Spanish Economic History Association, one of the largest among the international economic history associations, whom I hope to represent today properly. You know, my name has been on the program of the World Economic History ever since 2002 Buenos Aires. I have seen through many keynotes, so you can hardly imagine how humbling it is to be in front of you today. But for those of you who this is the first World Economic History PhD students' first or second year, be aware that in some 20 years, you might be up here giving a keynote. That might actually happen to you. So let's get down to business. What if everything that we think we know about economic progress was wrong? For over a century now, we have been measured progress by how much we produce, how much we consume, and how those two things grow. But here we are standing at a moment in history that is unique, like any other in history, where climate is changing, biodiversity is rapidly disappearing, and people throughout the world wonder whether we can keep living the way we have lived so far. The way out, according to some researchers, might be sustainability transitions, which is no other than very deep transformations on how we power our lives, how we use materials, and what we expect from the economy. And the first message to you today is that I want you to make you aware that economic history is absolutely central to sustainability transitions. But if I ask you how many of you believe that what you do for research is relevant somehow for sustainability, how many of you will raise your hand? Not many. Let me try to convince you. If you're an agrarian historian, probably you have been actually talking about natural capital and the limitations of the environment in the place you have been working for a while. If you're a business historian, you're very much aware that businesses have been exploiting, moving, making money out of extracting resources, resisting to regulation of the environment. If you are, say, urban historians have told us all about whenever humans get together, they bump into each other, whether it's air pollution, water pollution, or just simply stepping on the networks. Trade historians, you have always told us about how commodities have been moved from one place of the world to the other place of the world and how much cost that take over time. The labor historians know all about labor hazards, some of which have to do with environmental risk and hazard risk. And of course, if you're a historian of technology, you definitely know about how technologies have been adopted over time and what things foster or what things actually delay the adoption of technologies. And those of you working on the third world or people working on previous eras in pre-modern history or whatever, for you the environment has never been a theoretical threat. It's been the real life in which the environment imposed on whatever the people you study at those times was a real barrier to progress. So whether you call it sustainability or you don't, most of you actually do research that is relevant for the questions of today on how we can alter the way we produce and we change. Because in fact, economic history brings to sustainability many things. It makes a very long-term perspective, which is what we require for sustainability transitions. It does patterns recognition across different settings and contexts and different times. We have an understanding, probably like no other social science, on how societies actually change, not how they should change, but how they actually change. We also understand the market mechanisms, but we also understand that institutions beyond market also define change, and we understand frameworks that enhance and make change faster, and we know also of mechanisms that actually slow down change over time. And of course, economic historians, we are also very much aware of the unintended consequences of all system effects. We know better mostly than economists for sure, because they put it on, but we understand that externalities. We understand also path dependence and how change today depends on where we're coming from. So definitely economic history is central to what sustainability transitions, which is altering how we do things, happened. If I convince you of that in these very first few minutes, then over the rest of the talk, some of that is going to come, and I will come back at the end towards what economic history can bring. But if I have convinced you already that economic history is relevant, let me also bring you now to the one thing that I believe is crucial to the sustainability transition that we are facing, but also to the growth of the economy over the last 200 years. And that one thing cannot other be than energy. And if you don't believe me, you can always just go to seminal works of people that actually explain that energy shapes civilizations. It's much more than powering machines. It's how we organize our lives. Astrid Candes, who have been here today introducing me, but she has also one of the most important works on the long-term consumption of energy in Europe. And also for the future, you have the last book here as well. So let me try to walk you through what I have learned on the last 20 years about energy history, and why do I think it's relevant, and what can we learn to the current challenges. On a personal note, it's super fitting that I'm giving a lecture on energy history precisely at Lund. Because over 20 years ago, Astrid Kander invited me to join her energy growth workshop. And that lay ahead of me a whole new path of research, some of which I'm going to show you today. And it wouldn't have happened without her and without Lund. And in fact, you will see some research coming up from Lund today here. Let me first talk about some concepts before actually walk into economic history. The first is transitions. Because I talk about sustainability transitions, but transition is no other thing in any social science than the process of a period of changing from one place to another, right? So we have political transition, we have demographic transition, we have economies in transition. We have all kinds of transitions. So when we come down to energy history, it's no other than how the energy systems have changed over time. And we economic historians who have actually termed energy transition as a thing, we don't have any particular flavor about which kind of transition is better than another. We just basically observe how the energy system has changed over time, which is not exactly what people understand about energy transition today. Because when you actually look around today about energy transition, what most people had in mind is a very particular kind of transition, a transition towards a low-carbon economy. And I will try to explain you today why that's important, but that has a normative bit into it. You want a particular kind of transition, which is slightly different from what we did in historical terms. There might be future transitions, if we manage to survive the current one, which is still to be seen, in which, again, the energy system will change again in the future. In the most simple way, because it was the easiest thing to measure, the energy transition was simplified to be just simply which energy carriers we use over time. Okay? It was the easiest thing to observe. And in a very simplified fashion, we have had two transitions over the last 200 years. In about 1900s, whatever we have used before, that was mostly fossil fuels, firewood and biotechnology, whatever wind, water that we had around, but overall wood was finally surpassed by coal. In 1960s, at the world level, first petroleum and then gas will come to be the dominant energy source in the global energy system. But this is a very simplified view of what the energy transitions are. And I use the plural because it's not only what energy carriers we use actually change over time, it's also the amount of energy that we use and what we use it for. You and me are the human society that use the most energy ever, particularly if you are from the United States or Japan. We consume about 2/3 of the energy of the world. If you come from Africa or Asia, you guys have 1/3 left for you. So the amount of energy that we use have also changed. And what we use it for has also changed quite a lot. Historically, from the Paleolithic, what main use was basically feeding ourselves, and then slowly was producing things and then moving. But modern societies, for most of what we use, and just think of your own personal use of energy today, feeding is just a tiny bit of what we use for energy. It's about producing things and moving around, the thing that actually consume the most energy. One more thing that is relevant is the physicist's definition of energy, that basically is the ability to do work. That's the physicist's definition of energy. And that's relevant because when later on I will talk about the relationship between energy consumption and GDP, it will just be obvious that if you're able to do more work, you actually get more output, right? But we tend to forget the basic definition of energy. So now we have three things that can change on the energy. Can change what kind of energy we use, how much energy we use, and what we use it for. But more things have changed as well. The quality of energy have changed. I thought a lot about how to convey to you what energy quality means, but overall is energy that has better qualities, is cleaner, safer, and gives you more useful work, when you use it. And possibly the best example I can give you of that is precisely starting from the first use that we gave to energy, which is cooking. So you can actually cook a pot of meal with wood. And that will take you about 2,000 kilojoules, more or less, of energy. It will take you about 1 hour. You will produce an amount of CO2, which is about 35 grams, depending on the type of wood that you would. You could cook the same pot of meal with coal, which will take you less time and about half of the energy, but will emit a little bit more CO2. You could do it with gas, which again will be faster, will take less energy and far less CO2, or you could do it with electricity, which depending on which energy mix you use, the Spanish one is the one I've used that, but if you do it entirely with renewables, we basically mean not only you use a third of the energy that you use with gas and almost 10% of what you use with the beginning, but basically no CO2. And this example gives me also excuse to talk about 3 other concepts which are related. One is the energy systems. To be able to cook with all these energy carriers, you need capital and you need infrastructures. For burning or boiling a pot with fire, you just basically throw, a little bit of wood on the floor. You need the pot. That's about the only capital investment that you require, right? For cooking with coal, somebody have to mine the coal, bring it to whatever city you live, and if you're lucky, you have a beautiful iron cook like the one on the picture, which require an investment as well. And if you do it with gas or with electricity, you need extensive networks to get the gas or the electricity to you. In fact, electricity, if you think of it for a second, the electricity network is the largest machine ever built by humankind. Besides energy systems and the capital that you require for generating, for using energy, you also understand that the different energy carriers, if you require more capital, also imply that you require more income to use higher quality energy carriers. And that's what we call the energy ladder. The richer you are, the most likely you are to move toward higher energy carriers. You are most likely to use electricity if you are in a rich country than in a poor country. In fact, in Africa today, 4 out of 5 families actually don't have any clean energy to produce and basically depend on burning coal, burning firewood or dung or waste. The other 2 related concepts. The only final one is the idea of energy services. Because we humans don't require a particular amount of energy to have well-being. What we require is the service, in this case, a hot meal. And you can see you can do it with a lot of energy or with a little tiny bit of energy, but you just want a hot meal. Equally, that you require moving from one place to another, a hot space to live, or a cold one if you want to air conditioning. So it's energy services that we care about, not so much the amount of energy. It depends. That will depend a lot on many things. Many of these concepts, the energy transition for different energy carriers, the quantity, the quality, all of this, or most of this actually was research done by economic historians or other historians. But most of it comes from our field of research. But now that we have all of the concepts laid out, let me take you back to probably the first place in which we realized energy was important, and probably the first place in which all of you mentioned energy for the first time in your courses of economic history. What is that? England, first industrial revolution, right? Good. Okay, I hope you do that. If you don't do that, it's about the only place everybody mentioned energy in economic history. So William Stanley Jevons wrote the coal question in 1865, when it was pretty obvious that the Industrial Revolution was dependent on coal. And he wrote the book because he was worried that they were running out of coal, or what would have happened if they run out of coal. And that's the question about the subtitle of the book. And he also realized on one of the things that will also be relevant for the current energy transition, which is that if we become more efficient at using energy, we actually end up using more. Because as it becomes cheaper, more people want to use it. And that's what we call the Jevons paradox. This is the shape of the England energy consumption, and this is additive. So you have all the coal, and then you have the gas on top, and then the oil, and then all the new ones. Jevons wrote right there. Right. So in the next 50 years after he wrote the book, England tripled its consumption of energy, of coal, and actually managed to export coal to the rest of the world without trouble. Physical exhaustion never arrived. It was economic exhaustion when British actually found oil and gas in the North Sea and stopped slowly to use gas. As somebody once said very famously, the Stone Age didn't finish because we ran out of stones, right? Keep that in mind. We are going to need that. One more thing that I like to bring to your attention is that the amount of coal that the British consume is astronomical. As astronomical per capita, that's only one other country surpassed the 4.5 tons per capita. Guess which country was that? The US a little bit later. By 1910, the US consumed 5 tons per capita, which is the maximum anybody has consumed of coal. No other country, whether you think of Germany today or even the Chinese today in per capita terms, nobody has ever surpassed the British. But for a long while, this is all we knew. We had the British data on energy consumption, and we went about trying to explain the energy transition based on this. And given that we had the British and how the transition of the British data was based on past energy transitions, the transitions to a low-carbon economy is going to be slow because it took them 100 years to go into something different that was oil. I don't think I will have a complication in this audience to convince you that the UK is mostly the exception in many things in history, but in energy history is the ultimate exception. So some of us actually went trying to construct other energy histories and try to see what we found. In Pompeu Fabra in Barcelona for about almost 10 years, we went about building the database of energy consumption of the Latin American republics, all the way through the 19th century to the end of the 20th. In fact, we were not studying energy transitions. We were trying to use the energy as a proxy for economic development. We didn't have very good numbers on GDP or other things, and energy seems to be a good indicator of how well a country is doing. So we were trying to reconstruct the energy data as a proxy. But one thing stood out. And that thing is that by 1929, every single Latin American republic has actually have more oil than coal consumption. That is 30 years before that it happened in any advanced country. So then we learned something. And the thing that we learned is that the standard energy transition model of a very slow going from coal to petroleum and so on might not be so standard. That some countries actually might have what we will call leapfrogging, and I will talk a lot about this later in my talk. That is that you can jump over technologies, that some transitions can be very quick, and some of the countries here actually did the transition basically in 2 years after the Second World War, after the First World War, from 1918 to 1920. And sometimes transitions could be chaotic and even reverse. Some countries actually have had, having oil as the dominant fuel, found coal, Colombia. So they went back to coal. So there is nothing about the energy transition that makes it completely irreversible. And we also learned that there was possibilities for alternative energy transitions, and we learned about some things that actually might create those conditions. First, small systems change faster. That's inertia, like in physics. The smaller the thing, the less force you need to change it. Second, that transport costs matter and endorsement matter. For Latin American republics in the middle of the First World War, they couldn't get the coal from England. And it was cheaper to get oil, because in a ship, you can actually load more oil than coal in the same ship. So if you didn't have any of the two, it was cheaper to get more oil than actually getting coal. And we also learned that external shocks matter. In this case, it was the First World War that actually pushed the Latin American republics into oil. Some countries did it very, very quick because very, very small. Some countries have literally 3 steam engines. They can actually be, bought 6 diesel engines from the US, and you have already done the transition. So that's why inertia matters, or why small systems matter. But we actually also did this a little bit more for some European countries. And I know you can not see from afar the numbers. That's not important because this is 200 years, again, of England, Germany at the top, and at the bottom you have Spain and Portugal in different scales. So basically you can fit the Portuguese data on the first line on the German or so, because it's tiny compared. This data, in fact, is by Sophia Davis, as is stated there. It's a PhD student of the Lund department. And a couple of things that I want to say about this data. First, there is not only a difference between large and small energy consumers, it's also a difference between early comers and late comers. The early comers basically had not more choice for energy. If you were an early comer, you have coal and coal. But if you came late to industrialization, particularly if you came in the middle of the 1900s, you have coal, diesel engines, and a little bit of electricity, and you can put it in. And that allowed you to do funny things like leapfrogging, which the Portuguese did. If you look at what happened with Portugal, there's very tiny steam engine at all here. And when you find this big coal here, it's not for steam engines. They are burning coal for electricity. So the Portuguese actually leapfrogged, literally, the steam engine went straight into the diesel engines. But the other thing that's interesting here is the mixed. The other thing that's interesting here is how these mixed are evolving over time. And when we did the indicators for how the diversification paths construct from this, which is basically how diverse these energy baskets are, we found that they're fundamentally different. I mean, you could almost tell from the previous graphs, but we did the calculation of the Handel-Hindal index of variety or diversification. And why is diversification matter for transitions? It does matter because if you have a very concentrated energy basket, it's going to be almost impossible to change it. Because there are many changes, the energy carriers, the amount of energy, what we use energy for, so many things need to change that it's not an energy transition in singular, it's an energy transition in plural. Transitions had been accelerating over time. Small energy consumers and latecomers behave radically different from large energy consumers that were early comers, in energy at least. It is true that we have been adding energies on top of the previous ones. Most of them don't disappear. You have seen kerosene disappear, and I hope in coal will disappear. I'll tell you a little bit about that in a minute. And the other lesson has to do with more income requires more energy, but higher incomes also require more income also leads to higher energy qualities, and that in turn imply that we require far less energy to obtain exactly the same levels that before took us far more. All of this is very well, but doesn't solve the problem that we had in front of us. Because our real problem is this. Again, I was thinking for a very long while how I told you about climate change. Because there might be some people in the audience that don't believe clients, don't believe scientists. But convincing a cherry tree to blossom a few weeks before that has been doing over the last 800 years, tough. And cherry trees are blowing many weeks before what they have done on the past 800 years. So something is happening. And climate doesn't care whether we actually are better and we produce less CO2 per unit of energy or less CO2 per capita. What the thing is about total emissions. Doesn't look good. Few things about this. First, and it's not blaming anyone, but by 1950, 85% of the emissions came from the Western world, the US and Europe. It is true that from 2000, most of the emissions come from Asia, particularly China, and now India as well. Some of you looking there at the declining emissions from the EU will be tempted to say this is just deindustrialization and the Europeans sending to China all the dirt. That's partially true, but it's not all the truth. Chinese have brought millions of people out of poverty with a much more efficient use of energy than we had ever done in history. Just to give you some numbers. By 2023, China reached $22,000 of GDP per capita. And they did so with 5 times less energy than the Americans did reached the same number in 1975. Other way of looking at the same thing. China is today about 4 times richer than the UK was in 1900s, but it has done that with 60% less energy. If you want to think another way, if the Chinese have done what they have done with the UK levels of energy consumption, this graph would be 4 times larger. So there are some news here that are good. I don't want to call names, but that's one idea. Just not to blame countries, but energy sources, let me tell you where the real problem is. The real problem is the following. We basically have emissions, and this is again emissions, coming basically from all the fossil fuels, but mostly is to blame coal and oil. To less extent gas, because it's a third less polluting than the other two. What do we use it for? Well, no surprise. Coal goes mostly for heating and electricity, and I come back to that in a minute. Oil goes mostly for transport. Let me take first transport, and then I go back to electricity, and let's talk about it. This, on that line there of transport, is only road transport, your cars. This is relevant because so much is talk about aviation and flying, and most of you came here flying and probably felt guilty as myself. But come on, aviation is 2.5%. Okay, it's down there, aviation. The elephant in the room is your car, full stop, right? Now, which has been the first country in the world to ban the imports of fossil fuel cars? Europeans, we are trying to think of doing this. God's sake, blame us 2035, 10 years from now. There is one country in the world that has already done it. Last year, Ethiopia. Aren't you surprised? Very much so. Together with an Ethiopian colleague, Miru Kasufani, we are looking at this. Ethiopia is the second most populated country in Africa, so it's not a tiny place. It's true that they only have 11 cars per 1,000 inhabitants. Sweden has a little bit more than 500, right? So what did I told you about latecomers, the small energy consumers behaving slightly different? Look at this. What we're trying to figure out is first, what would have happened without the ban? And second, why they did it. What would have happened without the ban? You have it on the graph, given the growth trajectory of the economy in Ethiopia. 10 years from now, they probably will have doubled the number of cars. And why they did then ban it? Because they spent every single dollar they made on exports on buying fossil fuels. By January 2024, they were really running out of reserves, monetary reserves of the central bank. And they decided, listen, we are 90%, 99% hydroelectric country. So our electricity is totally clean. Let's stop the import of cars. Let's get electric cars from China and just get rid of the pain of paying and burning every single year. And that's exactly why they did it. They didn't do it for the environment. They did it for pure macroeconomic reasons. As one energy investor, Rob Carlson, put it, continuing to burn fossil fuels is a self-imposed financial penalty. And apparently some countries are starting to believe that that's a solution. And it gave me hope, because in many of these talks about the energy future, somebody will tell you how we're going to get Africa out of poverty to the levels of energy consumption of the first world. It's like, you don't need to. They won't get there. They will do something different. And I think that's the first step on that direction. Let me go back to electricity for a second, because it's the other big elephant in the room. These are energy sources. It's not emissions. So this is how energy is actually consumed in the world. What most people are not aware, despite the energy historians and energy specialists, is that 70% of the coal of the world goes to burn just to produce electricity. That's on average. In some countries, like in Spain or England, that was 99%, right? But 40% of gas also goes to be burned to produce electricity. So if you do the math, you basically get that about 40% of primary energy gets burned to produce 20% of the final energy. Let's get that number soaking on you. 40% to produce 20%. How can that be? because burning fossil fuels is incredibly inefficient. When you burn coal for electricity, you actually generate more heat than electricity. When you actually burn diesel in your engine on your car, you get more heat than movement. Okay? So that's why we go from the 40% to the 20%. If only there was a way to produce electricity without burning things. Okay, we are getting there. Two things I want to say extra about this graph. Do you see how coal is flattening out? And this is my hope. 2024 was the year in history when most coal was burned in human history ever. We are hoping that 2025 will be the first year in which coal will start to decline. Where is that hope coming from? 54%, that is more than half of that coal, is burned in China. And I'm going to tell a little bit about what's happening in China in a minute. So that's an important thing there. But let me just go back to England just for once, because the carbonization fastest path is electrification, is just stop burning coal for electricity. One way to show it is with England. Is there deindustrialization there? Yes. There is some movement of very heavy industry to other countries? Yes. But what it is there more than anything else is the British stopping burning coal. In fact, last year in September 2024, England shuttered the last remaining coal-fired power station, Ratcliffe, in Nottinghamshire, and is basically getting out of it completely. The CO2 emissions of England today are less than when Stanley Jevons wrote the coal question, right? So coal is not a question any longer in England. And it's going to disappear for good in England. And then let me get back to China, because something is really shifting in energy. Something is really powerful happening in the energy world. China is now much more electrified than Europe or the United States, which is interesting because they are no richer than us. And I told you there is a relationship between electricity and economic growth. And it's true that they are doing that, burning coal as if there was nothing. I mean, they are actually doing everything. They do nuclear, they do coal, they do everything. But it's true that they are leading the revolution in solar and wind power. And here you can see an estimation on how much coal has already been saved in China because of how fast they are expanding renewables. And in fact, the latest numbers that we have for the first quarter of this year, 2025, for the first time ever, the emissions of China are coming down, which I think is a good news. Because in fact, what we are in the world right now is in a race between climate change and tipping points. And it is my hope that in fact, we are actually at a tipping point, because we have never seen anything growing as fast as we are seeing now what is happening with solar. Let me give you some numbers. The photovoltaic cell was invented in 1954. Okay, so it's an invention of the 20th century. It took up to 2022, 68 years, to build the first terawatt of installed capacity in solar. The second terawatt was already finished by 2024, in 2 years. We are looking at probably the third terawatt coming at the end of this year. We are building about 1 gigawatt of solar every 15 hours. 1 gigawatt is a standard nuclear power plant, every 15 hours. And that's the average for the world. The Chinese are doing faster on themselves. That's the normal there. And wind power is coming very fast behind it. And wind power, if you think of it for a second, is just another way of considering the solar energy, because about the heat differentials with the sun. So in a very extreme example, wind can be considered also part of the solar. I'm coming to the final part of my talk, in which I'm going to be a little bit more speculative. And looking into the future, because I don't know whether we are going to make it or not, but I would like to imagine we can teach something. So let me tell you a story. I do actually go quite a lot to schools and high schools. And I actually show them these two pictures. And I tell the kids, where do you see the world going in the next 50 years? 99% of the time, they pick up the apocalypse. That says something about how we have been able to convey the dangers of climate change to the kids. but also tell us that we don't have really good places to go, which I think is a little bit of a shame, because in the 19th century, we had places to go. You know, in the beginning of the 19th century, we could imagine a world without the slavery, in which people could vote and women could be equal to men. And we more or less did it, right? But right now, where is the place we want to go in a century? Apparently that one. I'm a little bit weird on this one, and a little bit out of line with everybody else, because while most people actually think that the way to achieve things is just to reduce, it's true that consuming less energy will help, but what will really will help will be consuming energy that is free of carbon, full stop. So let me take you through a game. What could be the world in 200 years from now? I'm borrowing this from Jesse Pelton, who is an obsessed of these things. So these are not my numbers except for the first bit. Those are historical numbers. So that's the real scale. This is a logarithm scale, because otherwise I cannot go into the future. So let's try to do this. With the available technologies, without science fiction, I mean, with the things that we have at hand, where could we go from here in 200 years? If you are with President Trump on the drill, baby, drill, you could try to do this with fossil fuels. What will that take us? If we could burn absolutely everything that we know exists economically, that will maybe take us 10 times to where we are now. Of course, we will boil before that, but don't tell them. But that's about how far we'll get, about 10 times the amount of energy total, not per capita, total, of what we do today. We could try to do this with nuclear power. Nuclear power might take us about 20 times to where we are if we have managed to build not only uranium, but also thorium reactors. I'm talking fission nuclear, not talking fusion, not yet science fiction. That might happen, and I'll tell you why in a minute. That might take you about to 20 times the amount of energy we consume now. As I said, if you're able to pay it, and if we find a solution for the waste. I'm okay with that, because it's free of CO2. My issue with this, too, is that these actually are technologies of the second industrial revolution, if you think of it. On my mind, when people were talking about the third or the fourth industrial revolution, I always thought, but what is the new energy here? For the first industrial revolution, everybody is very, very clear, it's coal. Second industrial revolution, oil and electricity. Third industrial revolution, I couldn't find it until very recently. And now I'm starting to believe that we have it. And I do have it, I think that we have it, because solar is totally different. Solar is a quantum converter. You don't boil water, you don't burn things. You basically convert energy of the sun into something else. And with about 1% of the surface of the Earth plus storage, you could actually multiply it times 100 the current amount of energy that we use. 100. It's an order of magnitude larger than you can do with fossil fuels. And I know people say, but the sun doesn't shine at night. Yes, but it shines every day, regularly. You know, it's actually much more regular than wind power. We could have a whole talk about this as well, right? So we could do it, eventually. This transition is like moving from wood to coal. The only thing is 100 times larger and 100 times faster. But the thing that I want you to bring in mind is that this is not a technological miracle. It's mostly a social science issue. It's about how we organize society. It's about the business models. It's about the incentives. It's about the markets. It's about us. They tell the conventions all the time that research has to go to STEM. STEM is fine, but social science need to be in that, because otherwise it won't happen. And we economic historians know about that, because that's what we mostly do all the time. So let me just finish with a couple of things about economic history. I think that we basically have to think a little bit harder on how we do economic history, in terms not to change what we do, but have a slightly different lens, in the sense that encourage all the future generations of economic historians to incorporate sustainability in their research in a way that can actually inform the present debates and say what things work and what things don't work, and what things will definitely make this more difficult when society might accept or might not accept the changes. I also think that economic history will change in the future, and something that Cesar Hidalgo told us on Monday on his talk as well. I think that we will see more data, even more data, integrated in economic history, because all the methods for integrating previous data that was impossible to type, and now we can actually incorporate that with much more ease than in the past. I also hope that we actually collaborate more with social science on other social sciences and sustainability challenges, but also with the scientists on on the nature to bring things into the past, because I actually think that we can expand of narrative of the past to include more nuances views about how sustainability happened there and things that maybe have escaped our vision so far, because we were so concentrated on production and consumption and increasing these things without actually paying so much attention to these other things. So yes, we need to green the past a little bit to inform the future, because I do believe we stand in a very historical moment. It's my total conviction that in 50 years' time, energy historians looking at the 2020s, this decade, will actually have to look, okay, there was something changing on the energy system on Earth. It better be. And economic historians, we are specifically well placed to collaborate on this debate, because we understand very well how societies actually change, not how they should change. So we actually hold the keys to understand how we can do this a little bit better. We do recognize patterns that others might escape, because we look at very different places and different times with different institutions. So we might be able to inform the debate a bit better on different geographies. And we also know that technology is not always accepted by society, so that we can also help there. I think that economic history can and should mirror our times. We have to be in the debates. We have to be able to help defining better the strategies for the future. We have to be better at creating historically informative cases for the policy framework and say, see, that's not going to work because it hasn't worked in the last 100 years, so why is it going to work now? We should enhance businesses and convince businesses that sustainability work on their favor and not against their bottom line, that it's up for them to get this thing done the quickest possible, and to build a richer and more environmentally conscious understanding of our economic past. Because basically what we need for the future is economic historians that can bridge the past wisdom with the present urgency. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you so much, Mar. That was such an inspiring lecture. And we have a few minutes for questions and answers. Who will start? Oh, you have become so shy.
I have convinced them
Here, we have one here at the front.
Have one here and one there. A microphone coming.
Okay, you lead it.
I've got a question, but I've also got a wee anecdote as well. I mean, the question's about whether we should be leapfrogging nuclear, but let me give you an anecdote around that. At the last meeting in Paris of WEHC, I asked a question of the audience, not in an energy session, but a general question. And that is, how many people died of heat exhaustion in the last week? It was a hot time. I think it was 35,000 in Europe. And I said, well, you know, how many of you thought about nuclear energy? Whoa, you know, we want to have nuclear energy. And basically, they were saying they'd rather die.
I know.
So, you know, how do we get, I mean, do we have a case of leapfrogging nuclear, or do we just have a problem? I mean, I'm from New Zealand, and, you know, you're looking for a country that has no nuclear power or nuclear power ships, then that's where you go. But a serious question about nuclear.
It's not a serious question, and I have nuclear on my future of the 200 years because it's a perfectly okay technology that is carbon-free. And I know a lot about nuclear because, as he said on my introduction, I had a whole project that was called HONEST, History of Nuclear Energy and Society, trying to understand why different parts of Europe have such a different relationship with nuclear, in which some countries love it, the Finnish, the French, some others hate it, some others never had it. Nuclear has a very difficult societal situation in which in different countries become a different thing. I tend to think of nuclear as a Velcro, in which all the shit attached to it in different places. So that, let me give you an example. In Western Europe, where nuclear is associated with private companies and Americans, is the left that is against nuclear. In Eastern Europe, where nuclear is associated with the Soviet Union, is the right pro-European, which is anti-nuclear. It's the same technology. So, and it's a catch-22 situation, because it's a technology that can actually free you from CO2, but it's a technology that is expensive to install, there is no question about that, very cheap to run, no question about that, and then we haven't yet solved the issue of waste, which, well, you can bury it on the land for 250 years, and that's okay. I don't think we are going to leapfrog it. And I think, for what I'm seeing, moving small modular reactors might do a little bit of a trick. I don't think we are going to see big nuclear. I mean, the 1 gigawatt, precisely because of the cost. And I know there is another question, but let me say something about fusion, which I didn't mention. Fusion might still happen. And I say that with a grain of salt, because it's been there for every 50 years. Fusion is going to be there 50 years into the future. But the truth is that never in history there has been so many people researching energy as today. So black swans are possible, and fusion is one of those black swans that can actually happen. So I think we are going to see more nuclear. Probably not as much as the nuclear people want, and too much for the people that are anti-nuclear. But I don't think we are going to leapfrog nuclear. I don't think we can afford it. That's the other way to put it. There was another question here, I think. Mike, go in there.
Thanks a lot, Martin. One quick question. So you mentioned this is the first time we're in this situation, but when I think of sustainability, Malthus comes to mind, right?
Yeah.
And somehow the correction there was a bit different than what you suggested. So yours is a very positive view. Question is, have we just expanded the Malthusian situation, but there is another correction which is possible, which is via, just bringing down the population of the world?
Well, that's going to happen, whether we like it or not. I mean, that's the other thing. It's 100 times more energy with about half of the population in 200 years. So per capita, it's hell of a lot of more energy. Okay. But Malthus, as Jevons, were wrong. I mean, when Malthus said population will hit a limit, then the population of England tripled. And in fact, population now, all the macroeconomists are worried about depopulation. All of a sudden, it has become the theme. And it's like, how can that be the problem when we have been 50 years talking about overpopulation? I thought you were going to ask me for the other limitation that nobody raised the hand, which is materials, which maybe you have a lot of energy, but maybe you have the limitation through materials. Two things about that. One, solar uses the most abundant materials on Earth, silicon, aluminum, and oxygen, which is cool. And if you have infinite energy, or close to infinite energy, you can recycle absolutely everything. And you can think of pollution in a completely different way because you can destroy pollution and fight with that. At the end, I insist, think of energy as the ability of doing work. And all those things that you couldn't do, you can because you have the energy to do it. So I'm seriously, and I have my whole fights with the neo-Malthusians. You have seen where I come from. I mean, all my friends call me cornucopian for a reason. I'm a techno-optimist. And as an economic historian, that's the only way I can think, because that's what we have seen. So we have seen some collapses at local level, but not at the global level. And I need to think that, as I said, we need a place to go. And we have to imagine that. more.
I think we have room for one more question,
There's
actually.
one over there.
Yes.
Thank you for the marvelous speech. I work from 10 years now on energy in pre-industrial society. And I would make something, we should not forget that food is the elementary metabolism, and food is energy for the human body. You can shut the light or lower the heat, but shut the food is not an option. So we have to maintain, and this is one thing extremely important for economic historian, maintain agriculture inside the scheme.
Sure, definitely, absolutely true. And that's one of the other kind of artificial debates, the fight between renewables and agricultural land. And I think actually France is a very good example of agrivoltaics, for instance, in which solar panels have been installed in agricultural land very successfully. But then the narrative goes like, we are using agricultural land for renewables. It's like, nope. But it's being used. But I totally agree. Food is at the base. I mean, is the most basic thing that we need to cover. We have been adding onto food every other thing. Definitely true. Thank you for that.
And with that, I think we must conclude. Thank you again, Mara. And